of a country, which sometimes even
Yeah.
multiple countries in the case of Europe. And that allows you to exchange those bits and bytes truly locally. So also if it gets generated local, it will stay local. And if there is any incident with the users or vice versa with the application, you then have a direct contact that you can reach out to get information. So the peering sessions and having so many of them, at one point, yes, it does help also keep your costs a bit more under control, because what you usually do when there's a lot of traffic involved is that you connect with 100 gig or multiple 100 gig ports towards each other. And then you're not paying per gigabyte anymore. No, you just pay the flat fee for the whole port. So it's also very predictable that any traffic going over that port will have a fixed amount of costs. So it becomes a little easier to handle. Versus if you, let's say you don't have those peering connections, you are sending your traffic to a middleman to reach that ISP. And it could be going from middleman A to middleman B to middleman C before it finally reaches that ISP. And that then you lose all the guarantees that you have on the throughput, on the packet loss, and on the latency of the routing. Yeah, it gets a little bit technical, but to provide the best possible experience that I would want to have as a gamer or as a consumer of a voice or video stream, it is very important.
Well, yeah, thank you for explaining that. And you're going to be in the NETINT booth. We're very happy to be, hosting you. So there's no doubt that I know you're setting up your own meetings, and you have customers coming to see you. But I think we're going to be able to send a lot of folks your way, to learn how you can help. I want to. Get your perspective on something. Cost is right now, the big topic. It doesn't matter if you're selling CDN like i3d.net, if we're selling VPUs like NetInt does, selling software. Almost the very first thing out of a prospective customer client's mouth is, hey, cost is our number one driver. How can we reduce cost? What are your costs, et cetera, et cetera. So, I'm curious. One of the things about that I've just observed and heard from the industry is buying cloud services, buying network services, which CDN would clearly fall into that. Sometimes there's sort of hidden costs, or there's traps in it. So it can look on the surface like, oh, wow, this is amazing. This company, they're, per gig transferred is, fractions of a penny, whatever. I don't even know what the going rates are now, but, they're getting very, very low. But then, you check with that same company a year later, 2 years later, and they're complaining about their costs being out of control. What are some of the, the traps that companies can fall into when choosing an infrastructure provider? And, how might i3d.net make it easier for them not to fall into that, if they work with you?
I think that's a very good question. And it has a number of different aspects. Like we talked about the network optimization questions earlier. And what you see that with a number of clouds that they do offer a standard network product against an X price per gig. But then you later find out that it doesn't really work that well for your applications which do need a little bit more of that geographic connectivity. Because the default product is that they send all of your traffic out as quickly as they can to the third-party providers. So then you suddenly realize you need to buy the more premium networking product, which does include all of that regions and the backbone connectivity. And to give you an example from gaming, there's a number of large games out there right now where they also realize that during the evenings, about 15 to 25% of the players in a specific region were actually coming from another region to play together with their friends, or because of time zone differences. There might be an evening earlier, the server might be more full. That suddenly becomes then a necessity to buy when you first didn't even find it on the website. You only found it in the fine print later. There's also regarding the kind of solution that you buy, because nowadays you can also buy serverless kind of solutions or SaaS-based solutions where you pay, for example, per stream. And that's great when you start up, and but then when you multiply that by 1 million plus, when you would be successful, and then you look at the cost, like maybe I need to look at something where I pay per instance or per machine, and do a little bit more work myself, because then the costs are a lot more fixed. You know how many streams I can output on a machine, and especially then if you go with dedicated hardware versus virtualized hardware. On the dedicated hardware, you can increase the performance and output even more by, for example, utilizing VPUs. And you don't have the disadvantages of noisy neighbors who are also trying to claim the resources at the same time that you need them. So for that's definitely a big cost trap, especially when utilizing virtualized instances, scaling that up in a flexible way, because we all know cloud is the most flexible option that you can use. But if you have your millions and millions of streams there and still in the most flexible solution, then you're paying too much, because how much of that load that you have in the cloud is fixed and doesn't need all that flexibility, or doesn't need up to a per minute flexibility. And when you realize that, you're thinking, wait a minute, I could use cloud only maybe for the 10 or 20% of flexible layer that I need on a per minute based billing. And then the rest can be on these dedicated machines where I pay per month or per day or per hour with one of the solutions that we have that we call the flexible metal.
I like that. I like that name, flex metal.
Flex metal. So that you pay
catchy.
per hour. And yes, it takes some time to provision a machine because it needs to be physically installed. It's not like within 2 minutes on a VM.
Sure.
But it allows you to bring a larger portion of your daily curve or of your daily peaks, bring a larger portion to the more, let's say it, predictable cost infrastructure, where you gain the optimizations and the cost advantages compared to paying for the ultimate flexibility of the cloud.
Exactly. And NETINT VPUs are going in your flex metal solution, correct? And then they're also available for a customer that may just need to reserve a certain amount of capacity.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, this is something, thank you for explaining that, because the notion of the hybrid cloud has been talked about for years. Unfortunately, it hasn't really been realized, especially when it comes to hardware, for some very practical reasons. If you're going to bring an accelerator in, or any sort of dedicated hardware, so like a VPU, that needs to be available in both locations. So it needs to be in your dedicated data center, your on-prem, or wherever the customer's operating, call it their primary core service. But then it needs to be mirrored or reflected in the cloud you're flexing into. And by the way, this is true of GPU. This is true of any other technology. So even GPU, although they're much more accessible, extremely accessible in all the public clouds, maybe the particular version of GPU somebody's using is not available. So then, it forces people to have to scratch their head and either compromise maybe on quality, because they have to use a GPU it doesn't have as good of an encoder, or they're just paying way too much because all they have is, something that's way overpowered, but it can handle the video. So we're really excited about what we're doing with you and what i3d.net is doing to deploy VPUs, because the market has been asking us for this for, well, since we launched. So it's something, and it's taken a little while for the ecosystem to develop, but we're now at a stage where it's progressing really, really rapidly. So I think I'd like to wrap up our conversation here at this point, because what I want to do is implore our listeners, if you are listening before NAB, and if you're going to be at NAB, make sure that you get a meeting with Stefan, with the rest of the team that's going to be there, the i3d.net team. And, if you're running between meetings and you need to sort of just swing by, they're going to be in the NETINT booth. They'll be in the NETINT booth the whole show. So they have a kiosk, there's a TV set up there. They're going to be, holding meetings, doing demos, talking to anybody who wants to learn more. So definitely you should stop by and see them. So Stefan, parting words of insight or wisdom?
Yes, if I have to give one big piece of advice, is when selecting your infrastructure provider, don't just look at the initial nice things that you might get, like you get a few 100K of credits and they want you to really build everything on it and it's so convenient and flexible. Now keep in mind in the back of your head, how will my costs and product look when I am successful and scaling as a champion?
Yes.
And then you start to realize, okay, maybe I should not go with something that risks me a very big login, or where I ultimately am stuck with a massive million spend commit to get any discounts. Maybe I should go with a solution where I combine maybe different providers, so I have negotiation strength with all of them. So it's not just all about maybe the brand recognition of going with the most common names out there.
Yeah.
It's all about having the right architecture with the right cost model, the right network capabilities, with the correct trade-offs that your application needs. Because again, not all applications are the same. Some might need less concern on latency, but more on throughput, or more on packet loss, or more about squeezing as much as encoding as you can get out of every single physical machine. But you should always focus and think very hard, what would it look like when my application is successful, and ensure you are with a partner or streaming platform that is ready to scale then with you without any nasty surprises.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. I totally agree.